Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from Bangkok, Chicago, Dubai, the Caymans, just north of Cape Town. Welcome to Designing Spaces, to the Designing Spaces session. I'm blessed to have with me 4 leaders in architectural and spatial and construction thinking. Tony Mallows, the president of WATG, Tim Peck, the chairman of OBMI, Andrew Fay, the president of the Gettys Group out of Chicago, and Alessandro Tedesco, the chief executive officer of FEBC. I am David Keane, the executive officer of Quo, speaking to you from Bangkok this evening. Guys, good evening, and thank you so much for being with me, and welcome to everyone wherever you are in the world. Tony, let me start with you. How far is the pandemic an accelerator of both master plan and architectural change?
I think it's been quite significant, but there's no direct trend because everyone is still trying to figure out what's the other side of this look like. But definitely a much greater focus on not only social spaces, but how the component parts in a master plan all relate, and then how will they be managed. So it's a much closer mosaic of how all the parts work than it had been in the past. Very interesting.
But did you see the change coming pre-pandemic, and this is just and the pandemic is acting as an accelerator?
No, not at all, because primarily it was more about the regulatory environment around how people could move and relate than it was about design and the physical configuration and about how owners managed properties. It was much more the regulatory environment about quarantining, where you could travel. Tim, I don't know if you have any other observations.
I think so. I think it's interesting your question about whether it's an accelerant. I think there were a bunch of trends that were already sort of meandering their way through the industry. I mean the technology, and again, I know we may talk more about technology later, but I think there were some significant innovations in new tech, such as remote check-in and keyless entry and kind of various ways of controlling your life digitally, which I think has been accelerated by the needs of the COVID situation. And I think the whole issue of the focus on wellness again was a trend and was a very conscious trend, but that was all being accelerated. I mean back in 2019, the Global Wellness Institute was saying immersion in nature was indicated as the top trend. And then you've got the Stay Well program that the DLOS were putting out there with Deepak Chopra and the Cleveland Clinic and all of which have been adopted by some of the major brands, I think Marriott and Wyndham and a bunch of independents. And then you got that whole relationship with the biophilia hypothesis, which is kind of man's innate need to connect with nature, and all the way that the various ways that impacts your life. And you can actually, they did some surveys which actually put a kind of a value to some of that. I mean, the Biomimicry Institute was saying biophilic design suggests that the guest would be prepared to spend 36% more time in a lobby with biophilic elements. In other words, a lobby with a connection to nature. And I mean, I think even hotels.com did a survey which is saying, okay, when you're prepared to pay for a sea view, how much would you pay for a serious green view? And they were saying you could put potentially an 18% premium on ADR on that. So there's some kind of facts and figures that push some of this that have been happening in the background, which has all been accelerated. And again, you look at with one hotel.
Let me jump in there.
Yeah,
Alessandro, it's in terms of the construction industry. Do you see the pandemic as being an accelerator of prefab and of that kind of change?
So in some projects we are doing at the moment, and especially in the Kingdom, we are working with prefabricated structures. both on the Red Sea development and in a new development in Alula. So basically, they try to keep as many labors as possible at site. I don't believe this was thought as a pandemic action to reduce the possible spread, but it's happening. And the reality is that the sites are much faster. Now, I believe, and you can correct me here if I'm mistaken, there is a big difference according to the type of development you're doing. But as far as we are not doing high-rise building or a big, let's say, construction which requires structural infrastructure, the prefabricated material can help a lot.
Andrew, how much functional social change are you anticipating within the industry as a function of the as a function of the pandemic? Is there going to be substantive change?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. But David, if I can just layer on to some of the comments that the other panelists made about the trends and how they're impacting design and development. Because I think one of the big tricks here is trying to figure out which trends are accelerating, which ones are decelerating, which ones have stopped dead in their tracks, and figuring out how that's going to impact or is being impacted by consumer preferences going forward. And what is the guest sentiment, and what is going to make them feel good about traveling and coming to these social spaces in the future? And Tim was talking a little bit about health and wellness, and I think today health and wellness is a number one concern, clearly for many of the obvious reasons. And indoor air quality is more important today than it ever has been before. In fact, I would posit that indoor air quality will become one of the most critical differentiators in hospitality spaces in the near and immediate future. We're about to open a hotel in the U.S. that has a state-of-the-art, hospital-grade HVAC system and filtration system and monitoring devices in each of the guest rooms and in the public areas. So we're not only asking the guests to trust that the air quality is what it is, but we have the technology in place for them to be able to monitor that and then post it real time to the hotel's websites. And I think, in terms of gathering and the trends, all of the hotel companies are saying the things that they're doing around cleaning and sanitizing and health and wellness and air, but we need to have applications and processes where the guests can verify that what we're saying that we're doing, we actually are doing.
Right. Tony, in terms of social change, I mean, will social spaces become more social? Do you anticipate both behavioral change from the guest point of view and functional design change from your point of view, from an interior design point of view? You're muted.
I think that's a very good question, because the social disconnect that's occurred as a result of the protocols around COVID have really transformed how people want to socialize. Therefore, I think smaller groups, managed groups, curated, but also using technology to make sure you're comfortable where you go. And I think the spaces within which social interaction occurs is going to be smaller groups, diversified, and much more outdoors if possible. So I think rural and large-scale resorts will have an optimum chance to transform those social spaces far more quickly and far more easily with the integration of technology so that everybody feels comfortable.
Tim?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting when you layer the impact on social spaces with cultural issues as well. I mean, obviously you find, in the Middle East, lobbies are a very important part of the hotel for social interaction, much more so than in, say, the US, where lobbies become far more sort of a functional space. So I think it's really interesting to see how that that relationship will change, particularly in areas where it's culturally more significant. And as Tony was saying, I think it will end up with you break down the spaces to allow for more intimate, sort of safe groupings within any particular space. And the creative thing, which obviously Andrew and his team will be working on, is how you do that, still preserving the atmosphere and the feeling of the lobby. But lobbies.
Let me pick you up on lobby for a second. I mean, obviously in Asia it's the same thing, where it's the lobby was always sort of the center of the hotel, particularly in over the last 20 years. But obviously with the advent of lifestyle and be it Citizen M or Ace or any of the other of these kind of hotels, where the lobby has become a multifunctional space, but a very, very social space. What's going to happen now?
I think it's interesting, and I think it's a really interesting opportunity to reinvent the lobby, because you don't need the lobby for the check-in process anymore. I mean, that's now a digital process and an automated process. So the lobby is going to become an experiential space, which you can use in a. I mean, and it's fascinating, almost going back in time to the 50s and 60s, and you think where the lobby was the grand experience, the grand entry. And then you think about, okay, how can you reinvent that so that it becomes a space? We almost need to come up with a new name for the lobby, which, and it could be a botanical garden, it could be an immersive art experience, it could be, a whole variety of different opportunities for guest experience, I think. So it's an exciting opportunity.
It is. I mean, it is. And that's sort of how I frame the second. And this accelerator of change. Alessandro, do you see that change? Do you see substantive change, as Tim and Tony are suggesting?
Yes, I see it, and I'm very much in line with them. On the contrary of what I heard in recent conferences, where people were saying that the lobby will disappear completely. I believe is a space that you cannot delete from a hospitality development. Especially, there might be a difference between resorts and urban hotel or city hotel or business hotels, but it's always a point of aggregation. And as we were discussing a few days ago, when I went back to Italy for a holiday this summer, when they released a bit all these pandemic restriction and regulations, I mean, people were out gathering, of course, with attention and with following what were prescribed by the government. But the aim to stay together and to meet people, I think, is always there, and it will always be there. But I agree with Tim when he says that maybe on the design part, you all guys, and you are, I mean, the best pencil, some of the best pencils of the planet. Okay, you will have to find a solution where you can, let's say, avoid this big gathering, but as Tim was saying, maybe smaller concentration of people, but at the same time socializing.
Yeah, David, I think there's a lot of pent-up demand for social gathering. When this pandemic is behind us, and the trend that we saw going into this was the lobby becoming more of the living room of the cities in major urban centers. I think we could anticipate more of that in the future. And then from a design standpoint, I think a lot more flexibility built into the lobby space, maybe seeing more things of pop-up food and beverage, pop-up retail, continuing to update and revitalize.
Yeah, I think that's actually a fantastic point, and it is really interesting that all of a sudden, from, I want to use the word sort of relatively little change, relative stability that we've seen across the hotel industry, apart from in lifestyle, for so many years. All of a sudden, we've got an industry in flux, an industry which has to open itself up to Andrew's point, to pop-ups, to different food and beverage, to different art displays that Tim is saying. Is this the future in terms of being? Are we going to be able to be as nimble and agile in the future, Tony?
Yeah, I think lobbies are like the town square or the marketplace. They create where the identity of a place is all about, or they give you clues to an unfolding experience. So the design of the lobby is not going to go away. I agree with all the panelists. It's going to change, not only with technology, but also function. But the other piece is, what does design do into the future about creating a memorable experience? So I think it's going to be sequential. I think it's going to be diversified. And the other point to you, I think, David, you were alluding to, lobbies and social spaces in hotels are going to be far more flexible so that they can be episodic and transform themselves, not only for cultural events, not only for food and beverage, but also for the seasonality of a place. And hence connecting the lobby with the outside, if there's a view with the landscape or what have you, with terraces, I think will also become part of the new identity of what the lobby space will be. Particularly,
Alessandro, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry, no.
No, sorry. Okay. Alessandro, you've been an advocate of some form of status quo, or in our discussions of a form of status quo. Social, if we talk about accelerator, the pandemic could easily be defined as an accelerator of social change. And to Andrew's point, people want to be social. They want to get together. Mm-hmm. Is there a possibility or a likelihood that the socialization, once the vaccine is with us and everyone can feel safe again, is it likely that hotels, one, will be integrated further into the neighborhood and become more social environments?
We have some example of that that has already been tried by some operators. I'm sitting at the Indigo in Dubai, which recently opened, and the whole motto and DNA of this brand is to be a neighborhood hotel, so open to the surrounding and reflecting in the hotel what is the reality around the place where it has been erected. What I can see is that, listening also this morning to the CEO of the International Air Transport Association, he was saying that in China, they are back to 96% of what it was pre-COVID in the airline industry. Just, of course, internal flights, not cross-border flights. I mean, our office also in China is back to normality. So I believe that from the eastern part of the world, which has never been really exposed in the last century to pandemic situation, it's a new challenge. It's a new challenge in Europe. It's a new challenge where I live. It's a new challenge maybe in the US, in all the Americas. But Asia has been much more exposed over the past decades to similar situation, maybe not as critical as this one. And believe it or not, I mean, I'm astonished about the situation in China, because life is almost back to normal.
Yeah, no, I was listening to the same session. What was it? $85 billion the aviation industry has lost in 2020. Yes. It's a lot of money. Andrew, you have spoken publicly about your belief in the change in room structure, that you believe that the hotel room will or may, and again, as an accelerator of the pandemic, there may be substantive change in the functionality and the type of rooms that we see being built. I'm going to ask everyone the same question. What changes are you seeing? How substantive are those changes? And how long-term do you believe are those changes? We can't hear you. You're on mute, Andrew.
Sorry about that. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? Which of these changes in behavior are temporary, and which ones will stick and be with us for the long term? Before the pandemic, we were seeing guest rooms shrink. And we were seeing a lot more micro hotel rooms and a lot more expansion of public space and socializing and gathering. And now a lot more discussion around more utility in the guest room. So it's a place where people will now eat, exercise, as well as sleep and shower and work. So if you're going to try and accommodate all of that in the guest room, they're going to have to expand in size a little bit. We're definitely seeing, and I think that was happening before, but it was more of an afterthought. Putting gear into guest rooms to try and satisfy what we anticipated the guest needs were. We're seeing a lot more demand for suites. Often in hotel suites we're a vehicle for upgrading or taking care of group leaders and others, but now people are paying full rack rates for suites because they can have small meetings in there, they can dine in there, they can create a kind of a pod environment there. I think there'll be also a lot more demand for interconnecting rooms, which gives a lot more flexibility to kind of creating these pod type spaces. So I think all of those things are impacting guest room design and thinking now. And of course, there's a lot of technology which can facilitate exercising in guest rooms and all of the other things that Reg was talking about.
Tim, is the hotel industry agile enough to sustain these changes?
I think so, yeah. I mean, and again, we similar to Andrew, we have this innovation lab that have been focusing on the transformable kind of hotel room, and looking at the kind of obviously rest being the traditional arrangement where you get a good night's sleep, focusing on the bed. Live, which is for everyday living, entertainment, etc. Then you've got sweat, which is your personal workout space, and restore, which is your wellness, your private spa. And looking at, there are lots of, as Andrew mentioned, there are lots of technologies now that allow these transformations to be reasonably flexible. And we found that we can do it in an urban context with about, probably about 34 square meters of room and probably going up to about 45, 46 for a resort context, and still give the flexibility which allows the guest to have their room as a very kind of multi-use space. And so I think it's very viable, yeah.
Yeah, David, if I could jump in here, I think there's a trend that hotels and hospitality in urban settings could play in the future. And that's the nexus between work, food, and socialization into a setting that is managed by an entity like a flag or a hotel or an ownership. So you might start to see the morphing of hotel rooms, work suites, and places to eat and socialize being integrated. We started seeing that in urban mixed use, where the urban hotel was actually the social anchor around meetings, food and beverage, and then people could come from other locations and be based there, whether it was for a week or not. So there might, in fact, be a trend where the innovative hotel owner or managers start to integrate some of those key urban uses, office, food, and hospitality, into a new kind of work, relaxed setting. And the advantage they have is they can manage that environment far better than, say, the street or the farmer's market.
Yeah. Can I make a quick comment there? Because it's a play on that, where we're taking hospitality functions and putting them in commercial office buildings. So creating lobbies, if you will, pop-up F&B, lounges, fitness, wellness, all the things that Tim was just talking about, as a much more significant amenity component in major commercial office buildings, because the feeling is that those kind of buildings will be much more attractive to tenants in the future. So pulling elements of hospitality out and putting them into the commercial office space.
Well, that drives me a little bit further along, but we had spoken about, and Andrew, let me frame this to you. We've talked about Google, Microsoft, Apple during the course of the pandemic, all working from home,
Right.
and we're seeing a dearth of office space and rental office space in cities throughout. I guess one is the obvious question: is the office dead, or is the office going to change and, to your point, and have multifunctional spaces across floors? What is the future here?
Yeah, again, that's the million-dollar question. As you can see, I'm sitting in downtown Chicago, and there's barely a car on the street, and there's probably 5% occupancy and millions of square feet of office behind me. But I think as the pandemic closes out and we look to the future, that too will change. I mean, I think the working from home experiment has been really successful. I certainly, from our company's standpoint, have been terribly impressed about what we've been able to accomplish, but I think it's wearing thin. I liked Arnie Sorensen from Marriott quipped, we started out working from home, but now we're living at work. And people are getting a little bit sick of that. And so I don't think the office is dead at all. And I think, in creative businesses like ours, the energy that you derive from being around people, the connectivity, the creativity, all of those things will come back. And the office will be different, but office space will be reinvented along the same lines as hotels. And then certainly I think we'll need more space per person in an office going forward. We were shrinking that over the last several years, and I think now square foot per person will increase. And I think a lot of those amenities that we were talking about will come back into office buildings. But I think as soon as it's safe to return, I know lots of people are very excited to do that. Our office is open. We've been open for the past couple of months here, but nobody's required to come, so it's pretty quiet here today.
Alessandro, do you see an integration, an acceleration of mixed use then from following on from Andrew's point? Are we looking at an acceleration of or a change in the purpose of building where there may be a need for reduced office space and perhaps reduced hotel space, so there would be some form of advanced mixed use, or where we have retail, shared working space, office space, or whatever?
I believe so, David, overall. I can bring you the example of our company. We were going to expand and refurbish our office here in Dubai just before the pandemic. And before it was a necessity because we needed more space. Now, all of a sudden, we have even too much space at the moment with the pre-existing office because the office is open, but some people are still working from home. I believe the big incognito at this moment in time is public transportation. In Italy, apparently, is creating a lot of problem, and also the spike. One of the reason of the spike in COVID cases. So definitely, if someone has to travel on a public transport for a long time, I would believe that if he can work from home, he will still work from home. Definitely, you will have a lower count of desks required, especially in corporate offices or in jobs and professions that can allow to work remotely from home or from any other place.
I mean, David, we're seeing, just as Alessandro is doing, work from hotel. And it was, a lot of hotels are working out how to offer up their facilities for people that are sick of working from home. Work in a hotel guest room and have access to all of the hotel amenities. And we're seeing major hotel companies form partnerships with co-working companies to manage that piece of the operation. So I think that's another use for hotel space, certainly in the short term.
No, yeah, that's what I was referring to. Tim, I want to come to you. We can't hear you.
You're on mute, Tim.
Tim, you're on mute.
The Zoku product in Amsterdam, which is a great example of this, which is the sort of the loft, has your loft apartment in a kind of workplace option, co-working spaces for the global nomads. I mean, I think it's interesting. I agree very much with Andrew. Certainly from our point of view, there's the mentoring, osmotic learning from your colleagues, team workshops, and work. Just generally workplace culture is really important. From the office point of view, but yeah, I think certainly the office density will change, and there will be more flexibility in how you make your offering. And I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that impacts city centres in the future. I mean, there may be opportunities for residential to move into some of the what are traditional office situations, and you end up with a much more kind of convenient life. It's kind of, which will require a radical rethinking of traditional city centres, bringing it back to what it used to be in the old days. Creating community in the city.
Tony?
I think there'll be a greater emphasis on experience, whether it's millennials or the younger generations, as part of their work life, working from home, occasionally going into the office for group meetings and what have you. But when they start to interact, I think the experience of work and travel will have a new dimension on not only urban hotels and hospitality facilities, but also how they integrate experience with work and with leisure. And so I'm very optimistic, because social change does occur when it's forced upon you. But the remarkable thing I've seen as a result of COVID is the role technology has become an enabler to communicate.
Right.
But it still hasn't taken away the need for face-to-face interaction, whether it's mentoring, whether it's body language. And then if you fold that into what Tim was mentioning earlier about wellness, so that you have a far more integrated experience, which is about work, life, understanding, and you integrate your work with your travel and your experience. I think there's an opportunity not only for urban settings, but for some drive-to or rural settings, where, because you're out in nature, you're much happier when you're in nature, your productivity goes up. There could be some very interesting dynamics where you work from home, you might go to the office sometimes, and then you will gather with other colleagues and other consultants and other companies to meet together, to brainstorm or to have a session. So I'm very interested in how design maximizes the experience and the setting for, in fact, integrating a new work lifestyle, because the office is definitely going to change. We're looking at the office from the, just quickly, sorry, David, we're looking at the office from the point of view, how do you reduce your real estate cost? You've got 8 offices. How do you reduce your real estate cost? But that doesn't mean you stop spending. Quite happy to spend money on event locations somewhere where you can host a very intense 3 or 4 day event.
Do we see the generator model where we've got a kind of verticalized system running from hostel through to some form of higher end space or higher end luxury, mixed with perhaps other experiences as some form of spatial opportunity in the future? Is that where it's going to go, with one brand or with multiple brands? I mean, I can tell you from a branding point of view, I see the opportunity of a really strong umbrella brand enveloping one building, and the spaces themselves being verticalized and multifunctionalized and different experiences throughout that same concept.
I think the challenge is going to be in the large events that we used to have, whether it was convention centers or annual industry get-togethers where you had 2,000 to 5,000 people gathering in an urban setting. I think that is where the challenge lies, not only for the industry, but for most of us on this panel on how do you reinvent a way of getting together where you still have the productivity. People want to be together. Norman Foster was talking at a United Nations to talk about cities. And the fact cities will always want to bring people together. But now we are going to have to invent, manage, and design those places in a new way of doing it. And I think talking with Tim and Andrew and Alessandro earlier, David, there were some trends in the design of event spaces, particularly the public. I think it will come back. I am very positive, but it's going to come back in a much more thoughtful and mediated way around health and wellness.
Right, and some of the audience are asking questions, alluding to wellness.
I've noticed that.
In the next 12 to 24 months, as the industry has to cope with more or less, I mean, if we listen to the guy from IATA who was talking about meetings, and most people are saying 24 months, that meeting space is dead. Tim, what will be of those hotels where there is a dearth of meeting space, gigantic ballrooms, enormous amounts of cost of revenue per square meter, which can't be utilized? What's the short-term impact, and what are some of your short-term solutions for that?
It's really tough because a lot of those spaces are kind of very enclosed, and so obviously a lot of the solution is kind of fresh air and changing. I mean, if you think about airplanes and how their recirculation of air every 4 to 6 minutes, it's great. But when you're dealing with large volume spaces, it's a real tough one. I think we will end up having to reduce the spaces into much more manageable size spaces, which will mean a bit of surgery in there to try and kind of rearrange some of the spaces. If we can just improve the quality of the environment, we've been actually looking at some different concepts and saying, okay, in parallel with this, we've been looking at developing a kind of a vertical urban resort format, which is kind of converting the traditional kind of horizontal resort into something which will fit into an urban environment to allow for the convenience of a staycation, which kind of works really well with the whole COVID challenges and the challenges of travel. So it means kind of creating these internal curated spaces, which would be very much controlled and provide a kind of exclusive ecosystem of kind of neighborhoods within a hotel, which sort of addresses some of the comment you were talking to earlier on, is how you integrate the different hotel products within a space, and then maybe opportunities for some conversion aspects of some of the traditional, big box meeting spaces, MICE spaces that we could actually bring in a conversion into almost creating an urban resort within that. It would obviously just create it. Depends particularly on the space, and it takes an interesting creative mind.
Yeah, David, I think probably the harsh reality is that maybe 10 or 20% of some of these major group meeting houses in metropolitan markets around the world may never reopen as a hotel. And so what we're doing right now is working with some developers to look at repurposing these buildings to multifamily residential and taking all that meeting space and converting it into amenities for apartments and co-working spaces, and looking at student housing and senior living. I mean, there's just a lot of these hotels with a lot of space, and financially right now, it's very bleak, and some of them will just not make it. And so repurposing the real estate is definitely part of it as well.
Alessandro, I mean, there's in the Middle East, I mean, where you are in Dubai, I just can't imagine how many square meters of meeting space exist, and obviously in Saudi where there are a lot of visitors right now. What are you seeing? Are you seeing change? What do you anticipate will happen over the next 12 to 24 months?
There is, of course, a big difference upon the type of property that we're talking about. Definitely the one that were really mice-oriented are suffering and will suffer, because we don't know when everything will go back to a sort of normality, where this kind of entertainment that Anthony was talking about with thousands of people will be feasible again. On the other hand, the resorts are doing, I cannot say very well, but they are doing decently well because of the internal market that is going for staycation, as Steve was saying. This is possible here where I stay in Dubai because there is a coastline, so you have an integration in between the two typology of hotels. Maybe in a city, it's very interesting what you were saying, Tim, about the vertical resort concept, because definitely people will be pushed and will search for an experience in town. So without traveling a lot, so being in a sort of safe environment, but for something different. But structure are a challenge, big challenge.
Will you, gentlemen, be encouraging your clients to reproduce meeting space in the way that they were over the last 10 years? Tony?
No, I don't think so. I think what we're going to do is it's going to be much more tailor-made depending on what the client's focus is. And I think you're going to see something moving away from these large gatherings, these exhibition spaces. I just want to make one comment, which I think is a real asset for urban hotel properties. They're in location. Just got too much space in two big categories. What Andrew was referring to earlier with these large, big meeting spaces. But the other piece they have is these vertical garages. And what I think you're going to see in the next 10 years is those large 3 or 4 story volume, big auditorium spaces and those parking structures taken down. And because of the location, a repurposed urban development. So it might not be all hospitality, but there's, I think, a redevelopment opportunity with infill, and innovative developers are going to clean up, because if you take that bullet, if you put your hands on the parking structure and the big meeting spaces in the right location, that's worth absolute gold if you know how to transform it. And the one transformation I see is somewhat hospitality around food and beverage, lifestyle and meeting, but I also see urban residential, but repurposed not only with 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, but with a new kind of, as Tim was talking about, a new kind of vertical social structure, but not so much around hotels, but about urban residential, multifamily.
I think we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm sure. But I believe we only have a couple of minutes left. Tony, I know I want to ask, I know this is something that appeals greatly to you. Of landscape architect, of landscape and of the green environment, or the landscaped environment, particularly in the urban environment, how much change, how much is there going to be again substantive real change that will be lasting in this area as a function of the virus?
Well, as you know, I was listening earlier to, I think it was Rifkin, who was talking about rewilding the world, and how people's happiness quotient is a function of being in nature. Well, landscape design is one of the arts, one of the skills that brings nature into our everyday urban lives, if it's done well, and conversely can extend our lives into nature. Now you fold that in with the topic that we've been talking about wellness. I think landscape design is not about the greening of something. It's about understanding how people will feel better through the introduction of the natural environment into our everyday life. So I'm very positive, because I've always liked integrated design, all the disciplines coming together and creating a better outcome. And so I think landscape architects will have a far greater role to play in how we design and invent the spaces of the future.
Tim, I think we probably should finish in about 2 minutes. So I'm going to give each of you a minute each on this. Tim?
No, I agree with Tony completely. I think the challenge is actually how you don't just paint the landscape onto the interior of a structure, but you actually fully integrate it into a full wellness program, so that it helps refresh the air, it helps contribute to the well-being. So I agree. I think everyone is going to be seeking out that biophilic component, the contact with nature.
Alessandro?
We have all the things tasks to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's a nice challenge to have, because it's a forcing situation to modify what we were all used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of our panelists, and think that just keeping our eye on the prize here, which to amplify what Tony was saying, it's happiness. I mean, our job is to create environments in which we can make guests feel great, and whether that's health and welfare and safety and security and technology and biophilic design. I mean, the opportunities are endless, but the poor guests we all had, we've just gone through a major shock, and our feelings and the way that we're going to use hotels in the future are going to change. So just keeping our eye on the guest and really trying to figure out what is going to float their boat going forward is the key to it all. And happiness and simplification are a big part of it.
Gentlemen, I think we still have some time. I see that there's still actually a growing number of people joining the session. So, I mean, if we keep chatting for another few minutes, if that's okay with you, I want to go a little bit back in a circle to where we were at the beginning when we were talking about social change. And we didn't talk as deeply. Andrew talked a little bit about technology, or substantively about technology, as did Tim. But I want to, obviously, the integration of social change and technological change is the function of that, the synthesis of that is going to be the substantive difference that we see in both interior and exterior spaces in the future. Tony, how much is technology going to drive our future? How much is it going to drive that social change?
I read a book about medieval technology and social change by Lynn White. The plow, the stirrup, and the harness.
The Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, this technology is going to transform not only productivity, but how we relate. But it's also going to help us manage climate change. Because when we get into understanding how humans interact with the natural environment and the built world, monitoring what we do, intelligent buildings, monitoring social patterns, anticipating change through algorithms. So I think this information age, this third industrial revolution, is a real synthesis between intelligent technology and human desires. Our challenge will be how to ensure that we deploy that technology to create a better quality of life for individuals, and we manage the planet better. But I'm very optimistic that progressive technology, well used and integrated into social behavior, is going to put us in a much stronger position than before.
Yeah, again, I agree, Tony. I think in simple terms, the ability to provide contactless pathways through a building with automated doors, facial recognition, and the ability to use your smartphone now to order the lift and order your coffee and basically order your life, really. So I think that is from a technical point of view. I think and then obviously we've got robotics service and that sort of thing. But I think also it's interesting to look at how big data is going to change the hotel experience and the guest experience, and how it creates interesting opportunities for personalization of the guest experience. To some extent, with or without their knowledge, in terms of being able to provide a personalized experience for your guest, which may result in a specific room layout set for your guest because that's their lifestyle. And I mean, it's obviously, we know it creeps into all of our lives, but it does give you the opportunity also to provide them, as Andrew was saying, we're all about guest experience. And if you can predict their experience, what they're looking for, and what will create the unexpected quality of experience, it's an interesting one.
I often wonder, and I guess I've thought the same question to myself for the last 20 years, and I probably know I'm sure we're all fairly similar. How far down the technology path are we? Are we still at the tip of the iceberg? And its impact, I don't want to get into anything more philosophical than humanity, but we're talking about hospitality, but its impact on the way that we design, the way that we live through these spaces. Alessandro?
I believe we are still in the tip of the iceberg, yes. Maybe closer to the sea than closer to the air, but there's still a lot underwater. I can see it in the everyday use. I recently went on a Tesla car, and I was impressed by the performance of an electric engine. It's just unbelievable. And if you think about the complication and the detailing of a normal engine compared to an electric engine, all of a sudden you see that a small thing nowadays is able to express more power than a big engine, or if you think, the old ships or the old aircraft where you have used this fantastic, Spitfire with a huge engine on the nose. Nowadays, it's the technology is pushing a lot, really a lot.
Andrew?
Alessandro, if you really want to see it, get an electric motorbike. The torque of an electric engine for acceleration will scare the daylights out of you. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, David, I would say that I think we're probably on the tip of the iceberg with respect to technology. The big tech companies have put a lot of statistics out recently. And, during the first 2 months of the pandemic, we witnessed 3 years worth of digital adoption. So these adoption rates are exponential, and I think they're only going to continue in that regard. And I think it's going to present a lot of opportunity in the hospitality sector too.
Tim?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that, as I mentioned, the kind of technology, I agree. I think we're on the tip of the iceberg. Probably a frightening tip to some extent as well. I think, there are interesting aspects of AI that obviously we have to deal with through this whole process. And we don't want to lose that personalization, because hospitality is all about personalization and that relationship that you have with the guest, that it can't be an automated relationship. It has to be a very personal relationship.
Right. And in our business, we're going to see the adoption of all sorts of technology, which will change the way in which we provide our design and architecture services to our clients. That will be very different over the course of the next couple of years, based on all of these collaboration tools and these hybrid meeting environments that we're all participating in right now, and figuring out ways to expedite the process. There's a lot of clutter in the design process today, and particularly I think there are opportunities to really simplify and accelerate that, and this time is teaching us that.
I believe that a lot of barriers are down, no? So now people is more inclined to embrace new technologies and let's say new ways to do things that were done in a different way before. I think also the main problem is the travel issue. So it's more complicated to travel nowadays. It will ease maybe in the near future. But for us, for example, for what we do, now we are looking at to do remote installation in hotels with augmented reality, because the problem is, okay, you need to get there. And sometimes it's complicated because you have the quarantine, the safe period and all these things.
Gentlemen, we're more than 10 minutes beyond our scheduled time. So I think I'm sure the audience will be carrying on into different sessions. Tony Mallows, President of WATG, Tim Peck, Chairman of OBMI, Alessandro Tedesco, the CEO of FEBC, and Andrew Fay, the President of the Gettys Group. It's been my honor to chat with you over the last hour, and I wish all of you well and safe travels, and I hope that we can have dinner together somewhere really soon in a wonderful restaurant somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, but my very best wishes to all of you and to all of you in the audience.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.